You're listening to Quiet Horizons, a podcast of original science fiction stories written for the hours when the day is done. From here, there are no interruptions, just one complete story, beginning to end. Literary, unhurried, and best experienced with your eyes closed. Tonight's story begins now.
The Prior Art, Part 1, The Garage. The invention happened on a Thursday, which Marcus Webb would later consider appropriate, because nothing important in his life had ever happened on a Friday. He was lying on his back under the workbench in his garage in Flagstaff when he felt it, the faint, unmistakable lightning that meant the magnetic field configuration he had been iterating toward for 3 years had finally achieved something his models had predicted and his experiments had not yet confirmed. His screwdriver, which he had set on the concrete beside his hip, was floating. Not dramatically, not with the cheerful defiance of movie magic. It was floating approximately 4 centimeters off the concrete, rotating slowly on an axis that corresponded to the field geometry, and it was doing this because the coil configuration he had assembled above the workbench was generating a localized gravitational null zone, and the screwdriver had, without drama, decided to obey the physics of that zone rather than the physics of the Earth beneath it. Marcus lay still for a moment and looked at the floating screwdriver. Then he said, out loud to no one, "There it is." He was 40 years old. He had a master's degree in electrical engineering from Arizona State that he had not used professionally for 11 years, having left a perfectly adequate position at a defense contractor in 2034 to pursue what his ex-wife had called, with a precision he had not appreciated at the time, his expensive hobby. He lived in the Flagstaff house alone, supported by a modest consulting income from remote systems work he did 3 days a week, and spent as little mental energy on as possible, reserving the majority of his attention for the workbench and the notebooks stacked against the garage wall, and the problem that had been consuming him since he had first read, in 2031, a paper on gravitomagnetic field theory that had been dismissed by the mainstream physics community as speculative, and which Marcus had read and understood in his bones to be correct. The mainstream physics community had not been consulted on the screwdriver. He pulled himself out from under the bench and stood up and looked at the floating screwdriver for a long time. Then he picked up his notebook and began writing with the speed of a person who has been waiting to write this particular page for 3 years. His neighbor and closest friend was a woman named Dolores Vega, who was 61, retired from the Forest Service, and had the specific quality of people who had spent careers in wilderness management, which was a comfort with long silences and an impatience with unnecessary words. She had been watching Marcus's project with the measured interest she applied to most things. Not skeptical, not credulous, attentive. She had occasionally helped him carry equipment, and had once spent an afternoon holding components in precise positions while he soldered, and she had never asked whether it was going to work, which he had appreciated. He knocked on her door at 9 p.m. She looked at his face. "It worked," she said. "Come see." She came to the garage, and he showed her. The screwdriver was still floating. He had not touched the configuration since it achieved stability, afraid to disturb the field geometry, and it had been floating for 4 hours without degradation. She stood and looked at it with her hands in her jacket pockets. "That's floating," she said. "Yes. You made it float. The field made it float. I made the field." She looked at it for another moment. "What does this mean, in practical terms?" "In immediate practical terms, it means I was right about the coil geometry," he said. "In extended practical terms, it means I can scale it." "Scale it to what?" "To whatever I need it to lift." He paused. "Eventually, to a vehicle." She looked at him. She was a measured person, and she measured him now, reading something in his expression that he was not trying to conceal because he had never learned to conceal things from Dolores. "You're thinking about going up," she said. "I've always been thinking about going up," he said. She nodded once, the nod of someone filing information for later use. "When?" "Not soon," he said. "There's a lot of work between this and up." "I know," she said. "I'm asking so I can plan." He looked at her. "Plan for what?" "To come with you," she said, obviously. Part 2. The work. The scaling took 2 years. Marcus was methodical about it, in the way that engineers were methodical when they were working on something that mattered, which was differently than when they were working on something that didn't, with a care that was almost tactile, a slowness that was not hesitation, but precision. Every iteration was documented. Every failure was analyzed. The notebooks accumulated against the garage wall and overflowed into a second stack and eventually required their own shelving unit, which Dolores built from pine and installed on a Saturday while Marcus was inside recalculating coil geometry. The physics of the system were, he understood better with each iteration, genuinely novel, Or rather, he believed them to be genuinely novel. He had done the literature search twice, once in 2031 and again in 2034 when the gravitomagnetic approach crystallized for him, and he had found nothing. The mainstream journals had nothing. The fringe publications had gestures toward the same territory, but nothing with the mathematical rigor he was working from. The patent database had filed abstracts that touched adjacent ideas, but not his configuration, not his specific solution to the field inversion problem. That was the heart of the thing. He had not filed a patent himself. He had thought about it and decided against it, not for any sophisticated strategic reason, but because filing a patent required disclosing the mechanism, and disclosing the mechanism required interacting with the patent office, and the patent office was the government, and the government was something Marcus preferred to interact with as little as possible. This was not paranoia, it was a preference, well established and consistently applied across his adult life. He paid his taxes. He observed traffic laws with moderate reliability. Beyond this, he preferred to be left alone to do his work. He did not think about what the government might do with an anti-gravity system. He did not think about it because thinking about it was a distraction, and because the government had not been invited to be part of the project, and because the project was his and Dolores's, and that was the complete list of stakeholders as far as he was concerned. The vehicle took shape over the second year. It was not elegant. He was an engineer, not an aestheticist, and the vehicle showed this. A roughly ovoid cabin, approximately 4 meters in diameter, constructed around a central field generating core with a pressure hull he had assembled from components sourced from marine and aerospace surplus, a life support system he had designed and built himself from first principles with the same methodical patience he applied to everything, and a propulsion supplement in the form of a small conventional rocket cluster that would provide directional thrust while the gravitational field provided lift. He was not planning to go far, he was planning to go up, to demonstrate to himself and to Dolores and to the screwdriver that had started all of this, that the principle scaled, that the physics worked at a size that mattered, that the thing he had been building for 5 years could do what he had always understood it could do. He planned for low orbit. He had enough life support for 72 hours. He had navigation equipment. He had the filed flight plan that Arizona regulations required for unconventional aircraft, which he had submitted with a vehicle description that was technically accurate and entirely misleading. On a Thursday in March 2046, he and Dolores ate breakfast in the kitchen of the Flagstaff house, eggs and coffee, the same breakfast they ate every Thursday, and then went out to the garage and got in. Part 3. The Ascent. The vehicle rose without drama. This was the quality Marcus had always imagined and had spent 2 years engineering toward. Not the brute spectacle of chemical propulsion, not the shuddering violence of conventional launch, but the quiet wrongness of a thing that should not rise and was rising anyway, unconcerned, lifting away from the garage floor with the unhurried inevitability of a balloon, except that it was a 4-meter pressure vessel made of aerospace surplus and notebook calculations. Dolores was in the co-pilot seat, which Marcus had built to her specifications, which meant it had better lumbar support than his. She was watching the altimeter with the same steady attention she had brought to the floating screwdriver 2 years ago. Garage door, she said. I know, he said. He had built the garage door opener into the vehicle controls. It opened smoothly. The vehicle rose through it into the March sky. Clear, she said. The Flagstaff sky was a pale high blue, thin with altitude and brilliant with the late winter sun, and the vehicle rose into it while the garage below shrank and the streets of the neighborhood arranged themselves into a geometry that people rarely saw, and that was, Marcus had always believed, the correct geometry, the one that showed you what things actually were relative to each other, which was adjacent and small and organized into patterns that only became visible from above. He engaged the rocket cluster at 3,000 meters to provide directional control and transition to a vertical ascent profile. The field was stable, the life support was reading correctly. Dolores had a notebook of her own and was recording instrument readings with the steady rhythm of a person comfortable with observation and documentation. How does it feel? Marcus said, which was not a question he usually asked about engineering systems. Snip! Like being wrong about something I was sure about, she said. Gravity, specifically. Yes, he said, that's accurate. They rose through the cloud layer and above it into the clarity above 10,000 meters where the sky deepened and the curve of the earth became a suggestion at the horizon, and the vehicle continued to rise with no more effort than it had brought to the first meter of altitude. At 80 kilometers, the sky was the deep blue-black of the boundary, and at 100 kilometers it was black, fully black, the particular black that had no other name because it was the absence of atmosphere and not the presence of darkness, and those were not the same thing, and they were in space. Marcus looked out the forward port. He had been looking at this view his entire life in photographs and films and the images transmitted by other people's equipment from other people's vehicles. And the images had always been beautiful, and had always been insufficient, and were, he now confirmed, insufficient in the precise way that knowledge of a thing was insufficient until you were inside the thing, which was not an insufficient quality of knowledge, but a different kind. The kind that had tactile weight and three dimensions and the ability to move inside you in ways that images couldn't. Marcus, Dolores said. Yes, he said, he knew. I'd like a moment. Take it, he said. I'll take one too. They took the moment. They had been in low orbit for 6 hours, running instrument surveys and recording and eating the food Dolores had packed with the practical thoroughness she applied to provisions. Good food, well organized, in containers that operated correctly in the low-gravity environment. When the radio crackled. Marcus had a radio. It had not occurred to him not to have a radio. It was standard equipment for any vehicle that went up. And he was a methodical man, and standard equipment was standard for reasons. The voice on the radio was male, military in its cadence, and spoke on a frequency Marcus had not been expecting to hear. Unidentified vehicle at orbital insertion. This is United States Space Command Intercept Control. You're operating in regulated airspace without authorization. Please identify yourself and cease ascent. You are ordered to initiate descent and return to your launch site immediately. Marcus and Dolores looked at each other. They found us fast, she said. Radar, he said. We're not invisible. Are you going to answer? He looked at the radio. He thought about answering. He thought about what answering would lead to, which was a conversation with Space Command Intercept Control, which was the government, which was the thing he had a well-established and consistently applied preference for minimizing interaction with. He thought about the flight plan he had filed, which had described the vehicle as an unconventional experimental aircraft and had not mentioned orbit, and about how many laws he had probably violated in the course of the past 6 hours and what Space Command intended to do about that. He did not answer the radio. Marcus, Dolores said, in the tone she used when she was noting something for the record. I heard it, he said. What are we doing? I'm thinking, he said. The radio repeated its message. Same voice, same words, with the mechanical patience of a protocol being executed rather than a person having a conversation. They can't reach us up here? Marcus said, thinking out loud. Physically, no, but they can certainly be waiting for us when we come down. Yes. He looked at the instrument panel. The field was stable. The life support had 61 hours remaining. The orbital track they were on was a comfortable low orbit, passing over North America every 90 minutes, and the question of where to go from here was more open than it had been when the plan was simply up and back. You're thinking about going further, Dolores said. She said it the way she had said you're thinking about going up 2 years ago in the garage, not as an objection, not as encouragement, as a statement of observed fact. I'm thinking about not being easily intercepted, he said, which is a different thing. It is a related thing, she said. The vehicle can go to the moon, he said. I built it for low orbit, but the field scales with distance, and the life support has 60 hours, and the trajectory... Marcus! Yes. You're proposing we go to the moon because the government told us to come back. He thought about this formulation. I'm proposing we go to the moon because we're here and the vehicle works, and 60 hours is enough time, and we have not done anything wrong. We are unambiguously doing several things wrong. Anything wrong that matters, he said. The vehicle is safe. The field is stable. We have supplies. The moon is reachable. He paused. And if we go back now, they will take the vehicle. Dolores was quiet for a moment. She looked out the port at the earth below, the blue-white curve of it, the particular beauty of it from this angle that she had taken her moment to absorb, and was now looking at with a different quality of attention. They'll take it anyway, she said. Eventually. Eventually is not now, he said. She was quiet for a moment longer, then she picked up her notebook. What's the trajectory? Part 4, the pursuit, Space Command. Intercept Control was not accustomed to being ignored. This was the information Marcus inferred from the increasing urgency of the radio transmissions over the following 2 hours, the escalating rank of the voices, from the initial officer to a supervisor to someone who identified themselves as Colonel Patricia O.C., who had a voice that combined authority and controlled frustration in a ratio Marcus found almost interesting. Mr. Webb, Colonel O.C. said. She knew his name. Of course she did. He had filed a flight plan. I want you to understand that you are not in legal or physical danger if you return now. We have questions about your vehicle, and we would like to examine your technology. This can be a productive conversation, or it can be a difficult one. The choice is yours. Marcus keyed the radio. He had decided to answer this one because Dolores had given him a look that indicated this was necessary. Colonel O.C., he said, I understand what you're saying. I need some time to think about it. A pause. How much time? A few days, he said. A longer pause. Mr. Webb, you have at most 60 hours of life support. I know that, he said. I built the life support. Then you understand? I do, he said. I'll be in touch. He turned the radio down but not off because he was not unreasonable and because Dolores was watching him. She said, "She doesn't sound unreasonable." No, he agreed. What are you actually worried about? He thought about it. He was an honest person, with himself as well as others, and honesty required that he examine the thing rather than state it reflexively. What he was worried about was not arrest exactly, not legal consequences exactly. What he was worried about was the vehicle, the machine he had built over 5 years in the garage of the Flagstaff house, the coil geometry that was his, the notebooks against the wall, the 5 years of iteration, and the floating screwdriver, and the specific solution to the field inversion problem. That was the heart of the system, and that was his, in the way that anything you had spent 5 years thinking about was yours. He was worried they would take it, and he would never see it again. I know what they'll do with it, he said, if they get it. It won't be about exploring, it won't be about going places, it'll be classified immediately, and it'll go into a program that I'll have no access to, and whatever happens next will happen without me. Dolores looked at him for a moment. That might be true, she said. It might also not be. Which part? The part where you're certain you know what they'll do. She paused. You've been certain of several things in this project. Most of the time you were right, but you built a machine in a garage in Flagstaff based on mathematics the mainstream dismissed, and you were right about that. It's possible this is different. He looked at the instrument panel. The trajectory to the moon was calculated. The field was stable. The Earth was below them, slowly rotating. It's also possible, she said, that a technology that makes any object weightless has implications I'd want someone with more authority than us to be thinking about. This was, he recognized, true. He had not thought about it, not seriously, not in the way it deserved. He had been thinking about the physics and the engineering and the notebook mathematics and the floating screwdriver. And the further implications had been someone else's problem in the way that further implications were always someone else's problem when you were deep in the work. Let me get us to a stable position, he said. Then we'll think about it. The stable position he had in mind was a lunar transfer trajectory, which would buy time in the form of distance, and which was either a reasonable strategic maneuver or a demonstration of poor judgment, and the line between those two descriptions was, Marcus had always felt, thinner than most people believed. He engaged the propulsion cluster and began the burn. Space Command did not have a vehicle in orbit that could intercept them before the lunar transfer trajectory took them beyond convenient reach. Marcus had calculated this, not with certainty, but with sufficient confidence to act on. The calculation turned out to be correct. The radio continued. Colonel Osei, twice more, her voice maintaining its controlled frustration, and then a gap, and then a different voice, higher up the chain, offering assurances that grew more elaborate as the distance grew, and Marcus listened to all of it and responded twice more with the honest but unhelpful answer that he needed time. Dolores read. She had brought 3 books and a tablet of downloaded material, which Marcus had found predictive of exactly the kind of situation they were apparently in. She was reading a history of Antarctic exploration, which she had said, when she packed it, was appropriate, and which was proving more appropriate than even she had intended. He worked. There was always work. The vehicle required monitoring. The field required periodic recalibration. As they moved further from Earth and the ambient gravitational environment changed, the life support required checks on a schedule he had built into the instrument panel's alarm system. He worked through the first day of the lunar transit and into the second. And on the second day, Dolores looked up from her book and said, Marcus, what do you actually know about who else has tried this? He looked at her. What do you mean? The technology, the anti-gravity. Have you done a thorough patent search? I did one in 2031 and one in 2034, he said, nothing relevant. In the public patent databases. He was quiet for a moment. You work in defense systems, she said. You know there are patents that don't appear in the public databases. I left defense systems 11 years ago, he said. You know about the databases. He did know about the databases. He had known about them for 11 years and had not searched them because searching them was not accessible to a private citizen, and also because the possibility that someone else had already found his solution was a possibility he had not wanted to sit with while he was building. You think someone else has it, he said. I think Colonel Osei was very specific about wanting to examine the technology, Dolores said. Not about arresting you or charging you, just the technology. That could mean anything. It could mean they want it because they don't have it, she said. Or it could mean they want it because they do have it, and they want to know if you have it too, and how. She went back to her book. I'm not concluding anything. I'm asking what you know. He sat with this for the rest of the day. Part 5, The Intercept. They were 32 hours into the lunar transit and approximately 180,000 kilometers from Earth when the second contact occurred. It was not on the radio. There was no signal, no transmission, no warning of any kind. The vehicle's proximity sensors, which Marcus had built and calibrated and trusted, registered nothing. The view through the forward port was unchanged. The black of deep space, the stars, the moon ahead at a distance that was still significant, the Earth behind them at a distance that had become strange. And then there was something outside the vehicle. Marcus saw it first because he was at the instrument panel, and the instrument panel was forward-facing. He saw it, and his hand froze over the recalibration controls, and he sat very still because the first thing you did when you encountered something unexpected in a vehicle in deep space was not move suddenly. Dolores, he said. She looked up from her book. Look at the port, he said. She looked. The thing outside the port was not dramatic. This was the detail Marcus would return to later, trying to explain it, and he would always emphasize it because it was true and because it seemed important. It was not the looming architecture of the fictional ships he had grown up watching, not dark and angular and suggestive of violence. It was large, much larger than his vehicle, at least as far as he could estimate scale without reference points, but its size was incidental. What was notable about it was its quality. It had the quality of something that had been somewhere for a very long time and was entirely comfortable there, the way old mountains had the quality of being unconcerned with weather. It was, for lack of a better word, present. That's not ours, Dolores said. No, Marcus said. U.S. Space Command doesn't have anything that looks like that. Not as far as I know. She put her book down carefully, marking her page, which Marcus would later also consider characteristic of her. What are we doing? Not moving suddenly, he said. Good policy, she said. The thing outside was not doing anything that Marcus could observe from inside the vehicle. It was simply there, alongside them, at a distance, he estimated, at perhaps 200 meters, but could not confirm. It moved with them, not chasing, not pursuing, already at rest relative to their velocity. It had arrived at their position and stopped, and the question of how it had done this without the proximity sensors registering was a question Marcus filed for later. The radio crackled. Not on the frequency Space Command had been using, on a frequency Marcus had not been transmitting on, had not expected to transmit on, had included in his receiver suite because he was thorough about instrumentation. The voice was not a voice precisely. It was a sound that occupied the frequency range of voice, and that his auditory system processed as speech, but which had a quality he could not categorize, a quality that was not human without being alien in the frightening sense, the way some music was not quite in any register you had learned, and was not therefore frightening, but different. It said clearly and in unaccented English, Marcus Webb. Marcus keyed the transmitter. Yes. We would like to speak with you about your vehicle. Part 6, The Conversation. The conversation lasted 4 hours. He had expected, in the few seconds between the voice and his response, something overwhelming, a torrent of information, a presence too large to process. The encounter he had no framework for, and had not prepared for, because you could not prepare for this. What he got was a conversation, a measured, patient-specific conversation, conducted in English, that had no accent and no imprecision, and if the voice on the other end of it was not human, it was very good at the verbal grammar of human exchange. It asked about the vehicle first. The technical questions it asked were precise and showed an understanding of the underlying physics that was, Marcus admitted to himself, better than his own. Not in a way that was diminishing, but in the way a professor's understanding of a subject was better than a capable student's, the understanding of someone for whom the material was familiar rather than recently discovered. He answered honestly. He was always honest, and he saw no reason to be otherwise here. When the technical questions were done, the voice was quiet for a moment, in the way of something that was organizing itself. Then it said, "Are you aware that others have developed this technology?" Marcus looked at Dolores. She raised an eyebrow. "I've been told I might not have complete information on that," he said. "You do not have complete information," the voice said. "Your government has held functional anti-gravitic propulsion technology since 2019. Your derivation of the field inversion approach is independent. You arrived at it through a different theoretical path than the original development. Both solutions are valid. Yours is in some respects more elegant." Marcus sat with this for a moment. 2019, he said. "Yes, that's 27 years ago." "Yes, and they haven't." He stopped. He was not sure how to finish the sentence in a way that didn't reveal more about his feelings on the subject than he wanted to reveal. They have not made the technology public, the voice said. They have used it for a limited set of applications that have not been disclosed to your population. This is not our primary concern. What is your primary concern? Dolores said. A pause. The voice, when it came, addressed Dolores directly. You are Dolores Vega. I am, she said. Your question is the correct one. Another pause. Our primary concern is the vehicle, specifically what you intend to do with it. Marcus said, we were planning to go to the moon. Yes, and afterward? I hadn't planned beyond that. We understand this, the voice said. We want to discuss the afterward with you because the afterward is relevant to a situation that extends beyond your planet and beyond your awareness of it. Marcus looked at the forward port, at the thing outside it, patient and present in the deep space. Tell me, he said. What they were told took 90 minutes and was not, Marcus thought, what he would have predicted if he had been allowed to predict it, which would have been something involving territorial disputes, or technology transfer demands, or the specific concerns of a powerful civilization managing a younger one. What they were told was simpler than that and harder than that. The anti-gravity technology, the field inversion approach, the gravitomagnetic solution, the specific mathematics that underlay both Marcus's independent development and the government's 2019 program, was not in the framework of the civilizations that had been operating in this region of the galaxy for a significant time, a neutral thing. It was a threshold technology. It was the specific development that distinguished a civilization that stayed near its homeworld and a civilization that moved through its solar system, and then further, and the distinction mattered, because moving through a solar system and then further brought a civilization into contact with a set of conditions and populations and dynamics that it was not necessarily prepared for. This was not, the voice said, a criticism of Marcus or his work. It was a structural fact of the territory. We are not telling you the technology is wrong, the voice said. We are telling you that a civilization deploying it widely in an unmanaged way, without the contextual preparation that allows for productive engagement with what they will find, creates problems, not principally for themselves, for the existing structure. The existing structure, Marcus said. There is a structure. You have been developing within it for your entire civilization's history without being fully aware of it. Most civilizations are not fully aware of it during the period in which they are primarily terrestrial. You are at the transition point. And the government's program, Marcus said. Since 2019, they've been using the technology without disclosure. Yes, the voice said. Does that create problems for the existing structure? A pause. It creates the beginnings of them. The scale of their deployment has so far been limited enough that the problems are manageable. A public release of the technology without preparation would accelerate the timeline in ways that are not manageable in the current situation. What's the current situation? Dolores said. The voice answered her. The current situation, as described, was complex, and Marcus absorbed it with the specific kind of listening he brought to the most important explanations he had ever received, which was total and quiet and without interruption. The current situation was that Earth was considered, by the structure the voice referred to, a developing civilization at a specific and sensitive stage of development, and that multiple interests were engaged with that development in various ways, some of which were benign and some of which were contingent, and some of which were, the voice said, with a precision that suggested care with the word, competitive. The introduction of wide-scale anti-gravitic propulsion into a civilization at this stage, without coordination with the existing structure, did not make things better. We are not asking you to abandon the technology, the voice said. We are asking you to return to Earth, to allow the process that is already underway, the conversation between your government and the parties who have been in contact with them, to proceed, to trust that the outcome of that process is not suppression. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The conversation between the government and us, the voice said, and others, yes. The program that began in 2019 is not entirely a secret your government is keeping from you. It is partly a process of preparation that your government is managing on your civilization's behalf, imperfectly, with too much secrecy and too little transparency. These are criticisms we have made directly. Have they listened? Dolores said. Partially, the voice said. Progress is slow. It is generally slow. We are patient. Marcus looked out the port at the thing alongside them, at its comfortable presence in the deep space, at the quality it had of being entirely at home in the place he had spent his life trying to reach. He thought about the garage and the screwdriver and the notebooks and the 5 years, and about 2019 when he had been 33 years old and working at the defense contractor, and the mathematics had not yet crystallized for him. He thought about someone else in some other garage or some government facility arriving at the same mathematics by a different path, and the door that had opened, and what had been on the other side of it. You've had this conversation before, he said, with the government in 2019 or after. Variants of it, the voice said, and they agreed to keep it contained. They agreed to a managed development. The containment has been more thorough than we recommended. The transparency we asked for has not been provided. We have continued to press for it. A pause. Your independent development and your ascent today are, in a sense, the natural consequence of that lack of transparency. You solved the problem yourself because you were not told it had been solved. You went up because you were not given any reason to believe that up had already been reached by others. If I'd known, Marcus said slowly. If you had known, you might have made different choices. You might have engaged with the existing process rather than working outside it. We cannot know. Another pause. What we know is that you are here and that you arrived here honestly and that the mathematics you developed are genuinely independent and in some respects superior. These are not nothing. What do you want us to do with them? Marcus said. We want you to return to Earth, the voice said. We want you to insist, as a condition of your cooperation with your government, that the process become more transparent. We want you to be the argument for openness that they have not been willing to make themselves. A pause. Your government's Colonel Osei is a reasonable person. We have some knowledge of her. She's frustrated with the level of secrecy herself. She will be an ally if you allow her to be. Marcus looked at Dolores. She looked back at him with the expression he had learned over 5 years of Thursday breakfasts and garage work and floating screwdrivers. The expression that was not an answer, but a reflection. His own position made visible shone back to him at a useful angle. You're not ordering us back, he said. No, the voice said. We are not in the business of orders to individual humans. We are in the business of maintaining conditions under which humans can develop well. Ordering you back would not be consistent with that. But you think we should go? We think going back is the right choice, the voice said. You asked to be left alone to do your work. You have done your work. The work is real. What happens with it now requires more than a garage in Flagstaff. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked out the port at the moon, which was ahead of them, at a distance that was still achievable, which was where he had been going when all of this began. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Dolores. What do you think? He said. She thought about it with the patience she brought to things. I think we went up, she said. We did that. The machine works. You were right about the mathematics. She paused. I think what comes next is bigger than the machine, and we're not the right people to handle it alone. We never were, he said. No, she said. But we had to go up first to understand that. He nodded. He keyed the transmitter. We'll return, he said. We know, the voice said, with something in it that was not warmth exactly, but was not its absence either. The quality of a long patience that had been, in some small way, rewarded. Part 7, The Descent. He opened the radio channel to Space Command on the descent. Colonel Osei, he said. A pause of approximately 3 seconds, then, Mr. Webb. We're coming back, he said. I'm glad to hear that. Her voice had the controlled relief of someone who had been managing a situation they had limited tools for. Are you and Ms. Vega in good health? Yes, he said. We had an encounter on the transit. A longer pause. Can you describe it? Not over an open channel, he said. In person. Another pause. He could hear in the quality of the silence something being processed on her end. Recognition, perhaps, or the specific reordering that happened when a piece of information arrived that changed the shape of what you thought you were dealing with. Understood, she said. We'll arrange a landing site. I'd like to land at my house, Marcus said. She stopped. The garage. Yes. Mr. Webb, we have a facility that's better equipped. Colonel Osei, he said, I'm going to cooperate with you. I'm going to tell you everything I know and show you everything I built and be as useful to your process as I can. I'd like to do it as a person who returned home voluntarily rather than as someone who was taken somewhere. A long pause. The garage, she said. Yes. Fine, she said. We'll be there. The descent took 8 hours. They fell back through the black into the blue, the atmosphere thickening around them, the gravity of the Earth increasing from the gentle pull of low orbit to the full familiar claim of sea level. And Marcus managed the vehicle's systems with the attention of a person working an instrument he knew well and was not willing to lose. He had built this machine. He had spent 5 years and a significant portion of his consulting income on its components and its iteration and its calibration. And bringing it down intact was not a technical challenge, but it was a personal one. The final confirmation that the thing he had built was what he had believed it was. It landed in the garage. This required some maneuvering. The garage door was closed, and he opened it from the vehicle controls the way he had on the ascent, and he brought the vehicle down through the door and onto the platform, and set it on the concrete floor of the garage where it had started, and the field disengaged with the same lack of drama with which it had engaged, and they were home. Dolores got out first. She stood in the garage and looked around at the workbench and the notebooks and the shelving she had built, and Marcus got out after her and stood beside her. Well, she said. Yes, he said. Outside, he could hear vehicles arriving. Part 8. The Conversation with Osei. Colonel Patricia Osei was tall, direct, and tired, in the way of people who had been managing a crisis for 36 hours, and were professionally obligated not to show it, except that she had been doing this long enough that the obligation no longer required effort. She came into the garage with two people Marcus took for technical staff, and looked at the vehicle and spent 90 seconds doing what Marcus recognized as an engineer's instinctive initial assessment. Not the details, just the configuration, the architecture, the sense of what it was and how it was organized. Then she looked at Marcus. You built this, she said. Yes, he said. No, in this garage. Yes. She looked at the notebooks against the wall. Those are your development records? 5 years of them. She looked at him steadily. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd like a direct answer. I prefer direct answers, he said. Were you contacted on your transit by a non-human party? Marcus said, yes. She nodded once, the nod of something confirmed rather than learned. What did they say? They said to come back, he said. They said to insist on transparency. They said you were a reasonable person and would be an ally. He paused. Were they right? She looked at him for a long moment. The two technical staff were examining the vehicle with the care of people who had been trained to examine vehicles of this kind, which told Marcus they had seen vehicles of this kind before. My program, she said, has existed since 2019. It uses a different field approach than yours, similar results, different mathematics. We've been in contact with several off-world parties since 2021. The contact has been managed at a level of classification that I've been arguing against for 3 years. She paused. When your flight plan came across my desk yesterday, I was initially frustrated. I expected to be recovering a dead amateur's vehicle from the Arizona desert and notifying his next of kin. I appreciate that you didn't, Marcus said. Instead, you got to orbit, executed a lunar transfer trajectory, and had a conversation with a party I've been in formal contact with for 4 years, who apparently found you interesting enough to intercept personally. She looked at his vehicle, then at the notebooks. Your mathematics are different from ours. I know, he said. Independently derived? Completely. She was quiet for a moment. That doesn't happen, she said. It happened, he said. She looked at him with something that was recalibrating in real time, an assessment being revised on adequate evidence, which was the intellectual operation he most respected in other people. The transparency question, she said. What exactly did they tell you to push for? I don't have a specific agenda, Marcus said. They said the level of secrecy was more than they recommended. They said it was creating the conditions for exactly what happened, people developing the technology independently without the context to understand the situation. That's what I've been arguing for 3 years, she said, to people with more stars on their collar than I have. I know, he said. She looked at him. You know. They told me, he said, they seem to track things carefully. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the vehicle stays here for now. I'll get you documentation of that in writing. My technical people are going to want access to it and to you. She paused. And I'm going to want regular conversations about what you know and what they told you and what your mathematics show. I'm available, Marcus said. I work from home. I know that too, she said dryly. He thought about asking whether she had read his file before yesterday and decided the answer was obvious. Colonel Osei, he said, the transparency question. Is there movement? She looked at the floor of the garage for a moment, at the platform where the vehicle sat, at the garage door above, open to the Flagstaff sky which was showing the first colors of evening. There's a briefing in 10 days, she said. Congressional, classified but broader than previous ones. I'm presenting. A pause. I was going to present the program's history and current status. I'm now considering presenting it somewhat differently. Another pause. With a supporting case study. Marcus looked at her. The supporting case study being an amateur engineer who independently derived the same mathematics and went to orbit in a vehicle he built in a garage. It's a compelling argument for the information environment, she said. When the same solution arrives independently in a garage within 27 years of the original development, the information environment is not well managed. No, he said. I'll be in touch, she said. Don't go anywhere. She walked out of the garage. The technical staff followed, leaving the vehicle where it sat. Dolores, who had been standing to the side during the conversation with the watchful quiet of someone who was noting everything for later, came and stood beside Marcus. "She's good," Dolores said. "Yes," Marcus said. "You should have answered the radio the first time." He thought about this. "Probably," he said. "What do you think happens now?" He looked at the vehicle on its platform, at the notebooks on the shelving Dolores had built, at the garage door open to the Arizona evening, and the sky above it going from blue to orange to the first hint of what came after. "I think it gets complicated," he said, "in ways I didn't plan for." "You never plan for the complicated part," she said. "You plan for the physics, and the complicated part arrives on its own." "That's been my experience," he said. She picked up her book from the co-pilot seat and headed for the door to the house. "I'm making dinner," she said. "Come in when you're ready." He stood in the garage for a while longer, alone with the vehicle and the notebooks and the floating screwdriver memory of a Thursday 3 years ago, when it had all begun, and he thought about the voice in the deep space and what it had said about thresholds, about civilizations and what they were ready for, about the managed development and the transparency and the existing structure that had been there all along without any of them knowing. He thought about 2019, when the same mathematics had opened a different door and no one had come home and told anyone. He thought, well, they know now. He turned off the garage light and went inside. Above the house, the Arizona stars were coming out. The same stars they had been navigating by for the whole of human history. The same stars he had been looking at since he was a child, and had first understood that up was a direction you could go if you worked at it long enough and believed the mathematics. Somewhere out there, patient and present in the dark, something was watching the threshold and waiting. He decided, all right with that. It was Thursday. He had somewhere to be in the morning. End. As we reach the end of tonight's journey, I hope these quiet horizons have brought you a deep sense of peace and calm. Let your body grow heavy, your breathing slow and steady, and your mind drift gently into rest. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well, and I'll see you again on the next horizon.